All she's ever done is embarrass me." Those words sliced through the clinking of champagne glasses like a blade through silk. For a second, even the string quartet faltered, the violin's note hanging awkwardly in midair. My mother's voice, sharp, polished, commanding, echoed through the marble hall of Fort Beaver's ceremonial ballroom. I stood there, frozen near the corner table, holding a half-eaten canape that suddenly felt absurdly out of place in my shaking hand. Everyone turned. The wives of colonels, the recruits trying to look composed, the photographers who had been snapping away at the happy couple, all of them now stared at me. Mom. Colonel Margaret Hart, decorated Army medic, silver-haired and statuesque even in her 60s, had decided to detonate this humiliation right in the middle of her protégé's wedding. It wasn't just any wedding. It was Lieutenant Sarah Doyle's, Mom's favorite student, the girl she always called, the daughter I never had, never realizing how those words had carved themselves into me over the years like small, precise wounds. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Nice to see you too, Mom." She didn't stop. "You shouldn't have come, Claire. Not after what you did. Not after Margaret?" A calm baritone cut her off. The voice belonged to a man I hadn't seen in years, Colonel Reeves. He was her old, commanding officer, taller now, heavier perhaps, but his presence still carried that weight of quiet authority. He placed a hand on her arm, but she shook it off. "No, Reeves," she snapped, eyes blazing. "Let me finish. Everyone deserves to know who they're celebrating beside." A tremor ran through me, not of fear but of that old familiar shame. I knew exactly what she was about to bring up. The incident. The discharge. The one stain that had rewritten my entire life. I wanted to leave, to vanish into the crowd. But Reeves's gaze locked on mine, assessing, almost curious. Something in his eyes flickered, like recognition. He remembered. Maybe he'd been there that day. Mom stepped forward, voice rising. She disobeyed a direct order during an operation. Do you know what that means in the field? It means she cost her team their enough. Reeves's voice came quieter this time, but it landed like a command. The crowd murmured. Tension splintered the air, Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment her mask slipped, revealing a hint of something that wasn't anger, maybe pain. But it disappeared just as fast. "You're right," she said coldly, adjusting the medals on her chest. "This isn't the place." And then, turning to me with that perfectly composed smile that never reached her eyes, she added softly, "But you should have stayed gone." The band started again. A gentle attempt at restoring normalcy. Conversations resumed in forced whispers. I stood alone, surrounded by people but feeling utterly invisible. Every laugh in the room sounded like mockery, every glance a reminder of my failure. When I finally stepped outside into the cold evening air, the base looked almost unreal under the soft amber floodlights. My heels clicked against the stone path leading toward the main gate. Behind me, muffled music floated from the hall, a celebration I was never really part of. The stars were sharp and clear, almost too bright. The same sky I'd once stared at through night vision goggles during my last deployment. The memory hit hard, the sand, the smoke, the screams. I pushed it down. Not tonight. Not here. A voice behind me made me freeze. "You're Claire Hart, right?" I turned. It was one of the young corporals from the ceremony, no older than 22, standing straight as a pole. His hands fidgeted nervously. When I nodded, he snapped a salute. "Ma'am, it's an honor." I almost laughed. "You must be mistaken, soldier." He looked confused. "No, ma'am," Colonel Reeves said. "You were in the Kabul rescue op." My throat tightened. That was a long time ago. "Yes, ma'am. But legends don't fade that fast." I wanted to tell him the truth, that legends crumble under bureaucracy, that valor gets rewritten when politics get involved. But I didn't. Instead, I returned the salute weakly and walked away before he could see the tears threatening to fall. In the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a car window. The black dress, the faint smudge of mascara. The straight shoulders I still carried out of habit. All of it screamed someone trying too hard to hold her dignity together. Behind me, The doors of the hall opened. Laughter spilled out, then faded as Reeves stepped out. His footsteps were measured, unhurried. "You handled that with more grace than most would,"
he said. "Grace isn't really my strong suit," I replied, wiping my face quickly.
"Neither is showing up where I'm not wanted." He studied me for a moment, eyes thoughtful. "She's harsher on herself than she is on you, you know?" I snorted. Could have fooled me. Reeves smiled faintly. Margaret never forgave herself for what happened that day. She just translated the guilt into anger. "Easier that way." I looked at him sharply. "You were there?" He hesitated. "Let's just say I was close enough to know the full story isn't what made it into the report." Something inside me clenched, curiosity tangled with disbelief. "What do you mean?" But he didn't answer directly. Instead, he pulled a small card from his pocket and handed it to me. "If you ever want to talk about it, come see me. I'm still stationed at Walter Reed." I looked down at the card, simple, white, official. No rank, no title. Just Reeves, Medical Corps. When I looked up again, he was already walking away. The drive home was a blur of headlights and static. Mom's words looped in my mind like a broken record. Embarrassment, disappointment, disgrace. I gripped the steering wheel tighter each time they echoed, but then another phrase cut through the noise, Reeves's calm, almost cryptic tone. "The full story isn't what made it into the report." That single line began to gnaw at me. Because deep down I'd always suspected the same dot by the time I pulled into my apartment lot. The music from the reception was long gone, replaced by the hum of the night. I sat there for a long while, engine off, watching the reflection of my own tired eyes in the windshield. For the first time in years, I didn't just feel shame. I felt anger. The kind that doesn't explode. It simmers, quiet and cold. I whispered to the empty car, "What did you hide, Mom?" Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. On the far shelf sat a small wooden trunk, the one I hadn't opened since my father's funeral. The one that carried his name burned into the lead, Captain Daniel Hart. I walked toward it slowly. Hart, Hudd, maybe, just maybe. That's where the real story began. Discipline isn't about control, Claire. It's about trust. That was one of my mother's favorite lines when I was young. She'd say every morning before inspection, her tone sharp but proud. While I stood in my tiny childhood bedroom on base housing, bed made tight enough to bounce a coin, shoes polished until I could see my reflection. Back then, I wanted nothing more than to earn that rare smile of hers. The one she only gave to soldiers, not daughters. But tonight, sitting alone in my apartment surrounded by boxes of my father's old things, those words felt like ghosts whispering through cracked walls. The wooden trunk creaked when I opened it. Inside were neatly folded uniforms, a few medals, and a faded photograph. My father, smiling in desert fatigues, arm around Mom's shoulders. They looked invincible, unbreakable, the perfect army couple. Underneath the photo lay a small, sealed envelope yellowed at the edges. My father's handwriting stretched across it. "For Claire, when you're ready." My breath caught. I remembered the day of his funeral, the 21-gun salute, the folded flag in Mom's trembling hands. She'd taken the trunk that day and locked it away, saying, "He wouldn't want you to remember him like that." And I never asked again, but now, the paper trembled in my hands as I carefully tore it open. "Claire, if you're reading this, I probably didn't make it home. I know your mother. She'd do what she always does, protect you by shutting you out. Don't let her. You're stronger than her silence, Dot, and if someday you find yourself questioning what's right and what's ordered, trust your heart. The army will teach you to follow rules, but your conscience is the only command that matters. Remember, my girl, honor isn't obedience. It's truth." Dad. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands, tears finally breaking through the walls I'd built. Honor isn't obedience. The words burned because that's exactly what my crime had been. Disobedience. It wasn't about arrogance. It was about saving lives, and now, 10 years later, that same act still defined me in every whisper, every side glance. Every quiet room where my mother's name carried more weight than mine. I pressed the letter against my chest. inhaling the faint scent of dust and old paper. "You were right, Dad," I whispered. "You always were." But the memory that came next wasn't my father's. It was hers. I was 24. A medic under my mother's command during a humanitarian mission overseas. It was supposed to be routine, evac wounded civilians from a conflict zone. But when the orders came to pull out early, half the village was still trapped. I'd argued, begged, even cried. "We can't leave them. We can still get them out." Mom's voice was cold steel. "That's not your call, specialist. You follow orders. That's how you survive." But survival had never sat well with me when it came at someone else's expense. So I stayed, I disobeyed, and I saved them. 5 civilians, 3 children. But in the chaos, one of our own went missing. The official report said compromised communication and unauthorized deviation. The kind of wording that ends careers. Mom didn't speak to me for years after that. When the inquiry ended with my dishonorable discharge, she didn't even come to the hearing. Just sent a note that said, "Actions have consequences." The press ran her photo the same day, calling her the Iron Colonel. I still remember her expression in that picture, composed, untouchable. I wondered if she saw me on the other side of the screen and felt anything. The sound of my phone, vibrating, yanked me out of the memory. Unknown number. For a second, I considered ignoring it, but something, that quiet instinct my dad always said to trust, made me swipe, accept. "Claire Hart?" A calm voice said. "Male, older, familiar, who's asking?" "This is Colonel Reeves. We spoke earlier tonight." I straightened unconsciously, even though I wasn't in uniform. "Sir, I hope it's not too late to call." "It's fine. I wasn't sleeping anyway." He paused. "I shouldn't say this over the phone, but I think you deserve to know. There are inconsistencies in the report from your discharge case." My pulse jumped.
Inconsistencies?
"Yes, I reviewed the archives after the wedding. Your name's redacted in several sections. Someone tampered with the records. I can't confirm yet, but it looks like the missing soldier may not have been lost due to your actions at all." My breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Reeves said carefully, "the truth might have been buried to protect someone. And I think your mother knows exactly who." For a few seconds I couldn't speak. My fingers dug into the edge of the trunk, nails scraping the wood. "Why would she do that?" He sighed. "Maybe it was to protect the army, maybe to protect you. Or maybe to protect herself." The line crackled. Reeves's voice softened. "Come to Walter Reed tomorrow morning. There's something you should see." Before I could ask anything else, the call ended. Sleep never came that night. I sat on the couch, surrounded by the remnants of my past, the trunk, the letter, the uniform I could never wear again. The city outside hummed with life, but in my apartment, everything felt still. Waiting. At dawn, I found myself in front of the mirror again. Same face, same eyes, but something different now. The shame that had defined me for a decade was cracking, piece by piece, making space for something else. Resolve. If my mother wanted to bury the truth, I was done letting her. I'd lived long enough under her version of discipline. I folded my father's letter carefully into my pocket, grabbed my coat, and whispered to my reflection. It's time to find out what she was really protecting. The sun rose over the city as I drove toward the base, golden light washing over the skyline. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt. Every checkpoint, every salute from a young soldier, reminded me of the life I'd lost, and the one I was about to reclaim. The gates of Walter Reed loomed ahead. My stomach tightened. Somewhere inside, old ghosts were waiting, of command, of truth, of family. But this time, I wasn't running from them. I was walking straight in. News travels faster on a base than bullets, Dad used to say. By morning, everyone at Fort Beaver had heard what happened at the wedding. The texts started before sunrise, from old friends, former colleagues, even strangers who recognized the names. "Was that really your mom? Saw the clip on Facebook, hang in there. You didn't deserve that." Apparently someone had recorded the entire confrontation. My mother's words, "All she's ever done is embarrass me," were now trending under a hashtag. I scrolled through it once, then turned off my phone. The internet had turned my humiliation into entertainment, but one thing gnawed at me more than the public shame, Reeves's words. The report. The missing truth. By mid-morning, I was at Walter Reed, clutching my father's letter like a talisman. The base smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Every hallway echoed with the muted shuffle of boots and the low hum of machines. Keeping someone alive. At the end of the corridor, I saw him, Colonel Reeves, waiting beside a window. He wasn't in dress uniform this time, just a gray shirt with rolled sleeves. The man carried an aura that said he'd seen enough pain to never take silence for granted. "Claire," he greeted, voice low but warm. "Thanks for coming." "I didn't come for an apology," I said. He nodded. "I didn't call to give one." We entered his office, simple, tidy, nothing like my mother's immaculate workspace. Files were stacked unevenly on the desk. On the wall hung a single framed photograph of a field hospital, tense under a blazing sun. "I looked into your case," Reeves began. "The official report says you disobeyed a direct evacuation order, resulting in the disappearance of Sergeant Halle, but the CUMS log tells a different story." He handed me a tablet. The screen displayed a time-stamped transcript. My name wasn't redacted this time. Hart. "C. We have civilians still trapped. Command. You are ordered to retreat immediately. Hart. C. Copy that. Transmission cuts." Background explosion heard. Then another line, one I'd never seen before. "Hart. Leave her. We can't risk another casualty." I blinked. "That's my mother's voice." Reeves nodded grimly. "She authorized the pullout. The decision that left you stranded. But when Halle went missing, command needed someone to blame. Your mother signed the final report herself." The room swayed. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. She destroyed me to protect herself. "Or the army," he said quietly. "Same thing sometimes." I clenched my fists. "She told everyone I was reckless. That I couldn't be trusted." Reeves sighed. "Margaret believes in the chain of command more than anything. Even her own blood." I walked out of that office feeling hollow. Outside, the flag fluttered above the hospital roof, calm, steady, indifferent. I used to salute it with pride. Now I could barely look at it. I thought back to the wedding, her voice, her medals, her perfect posture. The way she'd smiled at the end as if she'd won something, if she wanted me to disappear quietly again. She was about to be disappointed, that night. I drove back to the old base housing where we used to live. The porch light was still the same, that cold fluorescent glare she never changed. Through the window, I saw her sitting at the dining table, reviewing papers with surgical precision. I stood outside for a long moment, hand hovering near the doorbell. My reflection glared back at me in the glass, older, harder, uninvited. Then I knocked. The door opened halfway. Her eyes flicked up, the same steel gray as mine. "Claire." No warmth, no surprise. "I assume this isn't a social call." "You forged the report," I said flatly. A flicker of something crossed her face. Surprise. Guilt, anger, I couldn't tell. Then it was gone. "You shouldn't go digging into things you don't understand." "I understand enough. You let me take the fall." Her jaw tightened. "You were insubordinate. You broke command protocol? And you broke your own daughter," I shot back. The silence between us stretched, heavy and sharp. Finally, she said softly, "If you hadn't gone rogue, he wouldn't have been lost. Halle?" She nodded once.
He was my responsibility. No, Mom, I was...
Her lips pressed together. For the first time, her composure faltered. "You think I haven't lived with that every day?" She whispered. "You think medals make it easier?" Something in me cracked. All those years of silence, all the self-blame, it wasn't just mine to carry. "I found Dad's letter," I said. "He said honor isn't obedience." Her eyes glistened, barely. Then she turned away. "He always said that. And look where it got him." "Dead," I replied, voice trembling. "Serving the same system that taught you to bury the truth." The air between us pulsed with unsaid words. Finally, she whispered, "You should leave." I stepped closer. "Not this time." She didn't answer, just picked up a file from the table and handed it to me. If you want the truth so badly, read this. Then decide if you still think you're the victim. I stared at the file, my discharge report, the same one Reeves had shown me. But there was something else inside, an old photograph. It showed Sergeant Hawley alive, standing beside my mother, dated 2 weeks after the mission. I looked up, heart pounding.
He survived?
Her expression gave me the answer before her words did. Some debts, she said quietly, are better paid in silence. I walked out into the night, the file clutched in my hands. The sky above the base shimmered with faint stars, and for the first time I wasn't sure if I hated my mother or pitied her. But one thing was clear, the story I'd been living wasn't over. It had just changed shape, and if she thought silence was payment enough for betrayal, she was about to learn how loud the truth could get. You think the truth sets you free, I murmured, staring at the photograph in my hands, but sometimes it just traps you in a bigger cage. The image of Sergeant Hawley, alive, standing next to my mother 2 weeks after his supposed death, burned behind my eyes. The date stamp mocked me. The man whose loss had destroyed my career hadn't been lost at all. He'd been hidden. I sat in my car outside her house for nearly an hour, rain drumming softly against the windshield. My mother's light was still on upstairs. She was probably still at that table, perfectly composed, acting as if the past hadn't just fractured between us. The file she'd given me was incomplete. The last few pages had been torn out. But I didn't need to guess where they were. I already knew. Her office. And if there was one thing I inherited from her, it was persistence. By dawn, I was inside. The base staff still remembered me, even after all these years. A quick smile, a borrowed badge from an old friend in logistics, and I was walking through the quiet halls of Command Building 12, the one that housed archived mission reports. Her office sat at the far end, blinds drawn tight. The door labeled Call M. Hart. I hesitated only once before using the spare key she'd kept under the third tile on the left, same spot since my childhood. Inside, everything was precise. Papers in straight lines. Files color-coded. The faint scent of lavender polish and cold coffee filled the air, and there, behind the desk, on a metal shelf, sat a box I hadn't seen in 15 years, wooden, locked, my initials carved faintly on the side. I froze. My pulse quickened. This wasn't one of her boxes. This was mine. The one she'd taken from my room before my discharge hearing. I'd assumed she destroyed it. The label read, Kabul restricted debrief material. My hands shook as I pulled it down. The lock was rusted, but it gave way under pressure. Inside were papers, photographs, and something heavier, a flash drive taped under the lid. I slid into her chair, plugged it into her computer, and waited as the files loaded. A folder blinked open. Operation Eco UNREDACTED. Inside were video logs. Raw, grainy, time-stamped. I clicked the first one, static, then shouting. The camera tilted wildly as dust filled the frame. Soldiers yelling coordinates, the crack of gunfire. My younger self sweaty, panicked, dragging a child into cover. Then another voice, calm, steady. Sergeant Hawley. Hart, we're pinned down. Go, I'll cover you. Negative, I shouted back. We're not leaving you. That's an order, specialist. The video glitched. Then a new voice cut in. Overcomes faint but clear. Pull out immediately. Repeat, all units withdraw. This is Colonel Hart. The camera jerked again. Hawley looked directly into the lens. Tell your mother she just signed my death warrant. The feed went black. I sat there frozen. Every muscle locked. My heartbeat was the only sound in the room. Then the next video autodash played. Same date. Different setting. This time an underground room, poorly lit concrete walls. Hawley sat on a cot, alive but pale, one arm in a sling, a voice from off-screen. Sergeant, do you understand why we can't release you yet? Hawley glared at the camera. Because someone has to stay dead for the paperwork to make sense. Who told you that? The voice asked. He smiled bitterly. Your colonel did. The screen cut to static again. I slammed the laptop shut. My hands were trembling too hard to steady them. Hawley hadn't died. He'd been detained, silenced. And my mother had signed off on it. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was a deliberate burial of a man, a story, a career. I shoved the box back together and grabbed the flash drive. But as I turned toward the door, a soft click froze me in place. Looking for something? Her voice, calm, controlled. I turned. She stood in the doorway, perfectly composed in her uniform. Eyes unreadable. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly. You shouldn't have lied. I snapped. Her gaze fell to the box in my hands. For a moment, she looked almost tired. You weren't supposed to see that. Why? Because it shows the truth? That Holly lived? That you used me as a scapegoat? She took a slow step forward. It wasn't like that. Then what was it, Mom? My voice broke. You let me believe I killed someone. You let me carry that for 10 years. Her eyes softened, just barely. You wouldn't have survived the truth. I laughed bitterly. You mean your truth? No, she whispered, voice cracking. The kind that breaks what's left of you. Something flickered in her eyes. Guilt, fear, maybe love, warped by duty. Halle didn't just survive. He defected. He joined the very people we were fighting. If the army had found out, it would have destroyed everything. The mission, the unit, our family's name. So you destroyed me instead. Her silence was answer enough. The room felt smaller now. The air heavy with secrets and disinfectant. I protected what I could, she said finally. Even if it meant losing you. You didn't lose me, I said, voice trembling. You erased me. Her lips parted, but no words came. I walked past her, the flash drive burning in my pocket. At the door, I paused just long enough to say, you can't control this anymore. The truth doesn't belong to you. Claire, I didn't turn. You said discipline is about trust. You lost both. Outside, the sky was gray, rain turning the parade ground into silver glass. I could still hear her voice echoing in my head, but this time it didn't crush me. It pushed me forward. I got into my car and stared at the flash drive in my hand. Somewhere inside it was the key to everything. Hale's survival. My discharge, my mother's betrayal, but I wasn't ready to hand it over to anyone yet. Not Reeves, not the army. Not until I knew why Halle had defected. And what my mother had truly been hiding, the ghosts of discipline, weren't done with me. They were just beginning to speak. Some truths burn quietly. Others roar to life the moment you stop running from them. By the time I reached my apartment that night, my hands were still trembling. The flash drive felt heavier than metal should. I placed it on the table like it might explode, then just stared. The rain outside had turned to a soft drizzle, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement like veins of fire. Somewhere between exhaustion and adrenaline, I realized I couldn't sit still. Reeves deserved to know. But part of me didn't trust anyone, not even him. I needed to see Sergeant Halle. If he was alive, if he'd really defected, then he was the missing piece. The one who could tell me what really happened in Kabul, and somehow, I knew Reeves could help me find him. Walter Reed looked different in daylight, less haunted, more ordinary. Nurses bustled past, soldiers limped on crutches, the smell of disinfectant and hope hung in the air. But as soon as I stepped into Reeves's office, the calm shattered. He was already standing, jaw tight, a file open on his desk. You broke into her office. It wasn't a question. I did, I said, unapologetic. And I found something you didn't tell me.
He sighed.
You mean Halle? I froze. You knew? I suspected, he admitted. But I didn't have proof until you just said it. He motioned for me to sit, but I stayed standing. Why didn't you tell me? Because some ghosts are safer left buried, Claire. His tone softened. Your mother isn't the villain you think she is. I laughed bitterly. She framed her daughter to save her career. He didn't flinch. No, she framed you to keep you alive. That made me pause. Explain? Reeves leaned forward, eyes heavy with something that looked like regret. Halle wasn't just a soldier. He was part of an intelligence unit, a covert branch working with local militias. After Kabul, he went rogue. The army couldn't afford that leak. Your mother negotiated a deal. If she took the fall as the commanding officer, the inquiry would stop at you. The higher-ups would never dig deeper. I shook my head slowly. So she sacrificed me to protect the system? To protect you from the system, he said quietly. If your name had stayed in those files, you'd be a target. The room spun, my anger colliding with disbelief. You're saying she ruined my life to save it? Reeves didn't answer right away. He just handed me another folder. Inside was a classified memo, my name struck through in red ink. Beside it, a note, per call, Hart's request, discharge instead of prosecution. The air left my lungs. Prosecution? I whispered. For what? For treason, he said simply. They thought you helped Holly escape. I stared at the words until they blurred. The idea that my own mother had chosen silence over explanation. That she'd watched me drown in shame just to keep me breathing. It twisted something inside me I didn't know could still bend. I need to see him, I finally said. Halle, Reeves hesitated. He's off the grid. But there's a man at Arlington who might know how to reach him. Major Westbrook, retired intelligence. He's not easy to convince. I'm not asking for permission, I said, already halfway to the door. Just a name. He watched me go, voice quiet but firm. Claire, be careful. Truth doesn't always come clean. Arlington Cemetery shimmered under the afternoon sun. Rows of white headstones like disciplined soldiers frozen in eternal formation. I found Westbrook sitting near Section 60, a folded flag resting beside him. Eyes scanning the horizon like he could still see enemies there. He didn't look surprised to see me. You look like your mother, he said. His voice rough with years of command and regret. And you've got your father's stubborn eyes. Dangerous combination. I stayed standing. You knew Halle? He didn't answer, just lit a cigarette, the smoke curling in the still air. What do you want, kid? I want to find him.
He chuckled bitterly.
That's what your mother said once. Something in my chest tightened. Then she lied to both of us? Westbrook studied me for a long moment, then sighed. You really don't know, do you? Halle isn't missing.
He's hiding.
And not from us, from himself. What does that mean?
He dropped his gaze.
After Kabul, he flipped. Not for money, not for ideology, for guilt. He thought your mother left him behind to save you. He called it a trade. A trade? I whispered. He said she told him. Someone has to take the fall so the other can live. And he believed her. That's why he stayed dead. The words hollowed me out. My mother hadn't chosen her career. She'd chosen me. And she'd chosen Hale's silence to seal it. Westbrook stood, brushed off his jacket, and nodded toward the older section of the cemetery. Row 19, Stone 44B, Hale's grave. Empty, of course. But sometimes people leave messages. I found the headstone easily. SGT, Thomas Halle, courage beyond measure. Fresh flowers lay at its base. A small, weathered envelope was tucked behind them. My hands shook as I unfolded it. If you're reading this, you found the truth too. Don't hate her, Claire. She made a soldier's choice, the kind that costs everything but saves what matters most. Tell her. I kept my promise. Tate pressed the note to my chest, the wind whispering through the trees above. For the first time, the anger began to unravel, replaced by something far heavier, understanding. Halle had known. He'd played his part so I could live free of suspicion. My mother hadn't betrayed me. She damned herself to protect me. By the time I got back to my car, my reflection in the glass looked different. Softer, maybe, sadder, but determined that the reckoning wasn't over. Not with my mother. Not with Reeves, not with the ghosts that still held our family. Hostage. But now I knew the battlefield had changed. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redemption. And somewhere in that gray space between guilt and grace, I would finally decide what kind of heart I was meant to be. I used to believe closure came with confrontation. That one final argument could fix a lifetime of silence. But sometimes closure doesn't shout. It whispers. In ink, in memory, in words never meant to be read aloud. 2 nights after finding Hale's letter, I sat at my kitchen table again, the same flash drive lying beside a steaming mug of untouched coffee. The rain had returned, a steady rhythm tapping against the window like a heartbeat. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face at the wedding, the fury, the disappointment, the pride she wouldn't let herself feel, and now I knew why. On my desk sat an empty envelope. I had written her name on it a dozen times, crossed it out each time, started again. Colonel Margaret Hart, then just Mom. This one was going to be the last dot. I started the letter 3 different ways. First with anger, then with apology. But in the end, I started it with truth. You always said soldiers don't cry, Mom. That tears were a weakness the enemy could smell. But I think what you meant was, don't cry where they can see you. My pen hovered for a long time before I kept going. I found Halle, or what's left of him. He told me you traded your honor to protect me. I used to hate you for the silence, but now I understand. Silence was the only language you had left. I paused, reading the words as if they belonged to someone else. The kitchen felt too quiet. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the world. You taught me how to stand tall, even when my knees were shaking. But you never taught me how to forgive. Not you, not myself. Maybe that's something I have to learn on my own. My eyes burned, but I kept writing. You once told me that leadership means making the kind of choices that don't let you sleep at night. I used to think that was a warning. Now I see it was a confession. When the letter was done, I sealed it without rereading it. Some truths don't need to be polished. They need to bleed. I slipped it into my jacket pocket and drove. The city blurred by in streaks of light, red, gold, the pale blue of dawn barely breaking through the horizon. My destination wasn't home or base this time. It was the small brick townhouse near the river. My mother's place. Her car was in the driveway, same as always, spotless. Curtains drawn military perfect. I stood outside for a full minute before knocking. She opened the door in her robe, eyes narrowing the moment she saw me. But for once she didn't speak first. I did. I found him. That got her attention. Her posture straightened, her lips parting slightly. Halle? She asked. I nodded. And I found your letter in his grave. Her face went pale. You weren't supposed to. I know, I interrupted. But I did. And now you don't have to hide anymore. The silence stretched between us like a minefield. Then she stepped aside, wordlessly inviting me in. The living room looked exactly as it did when I was a kid, medals on the wall, the faint scent of polish and pine. A single photo sat on the mantel, her, Dad, and me at my commissioning ceremony. We were all smiling. It looked like a lie. She sat down on the couch. For once, she looked smaller than I remembered. I told myself I'd explain one day, she said quietly. But every time I looked at you, I saw the career I ended to keep you safe. And I hated myself for it. I handed her the envelope. Then read this. Her fingers trembled as she took it, but she didn't open it. She just stared at my handwriting, her name written simply, Mom. Then she looked up at me, eyes shining with something she'd spent years burying. You look so much like him when you're angry, she said softly. Your father. I felt my throat tighten. You think he'd be proud of us? She smiled weakly. He'd be furious. Which means yes. The moment felt fragile, too fragile for words. So I stood to leave, but as I reached the door, she called after me. Claire. I turned. She held up the letter, her expression unreadable. You wrote this for me? I nodded. It's everything I never said. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then maybe it's time I wrote mine. That evening I drove to Arlington again. The sky burned orange and violet as the sun dipped behind the stones. I stood at Hale's grave, the envelope still warm from her hands now resting against the flowers. I delivered it, I whispered. She knows. A faint breeze brushed across my face, soft, almost approving. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I believed in messages that find their way to the living when they need them most. I stayed until the last light faded. And for the first time in years, I felt unburdened. Not healed, but lighter. Like the war I'd been fighting was finally winding down that night. Before sleep could take me, I got a message on my phone. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. She read it. She's proud. More than you know. I didn't need to ask who it was from. Some debts, some promises, don't end at the grave. I turned off the light, letting the quiet fill the room. For the first time since Kabul, I let myself cry, not for pain, for peace. And there it was, her voice, calm and unmistakable, breaking through the paper like it had been waiting years to breathe. Claire, you were never meant to carry my ghosts. You were only meant to learn from them. I did what I thought was right, not for the army, not for duty, but for you. I couldn't tell you then because I needed you to hate me long enough to survive it. You think the hearts are built from steel, but we're not. We're built from sacrifice, tempered in it. That's how you know what matters. If you ever find peace, don't question it. Just let it hold you. That will be your greatest rebellion. Mom? My throat tightened as I read the last line. I'd imagined apologies, explanations, something dramatic. But this quiet acceptance, this surrender, it broke me in the most gentle way possible. I folded the letter back, pressed it to my chest, and whispered, "Goodbye." Mom. Though it sounded more like thank you, the morning of my departure was cloudless. The kind of morning that felt too clean for endings. My cab driver loaded the duffel into the trunk while I took one last look at the building I'd called home. My reflection stared back at me from the glass door, uniform crisp, expression unreadable. For the first time, I didn't see the disgraced daughter or the accused officer. I saw a soldier again. Not because of the uniform, but because of the scars it hid. As we pulled away, the city unfurled behind me like a fading photograph. The skyline shrank, the familiar streets vanished, and all that was left was road, open and uncertain. I thought about Reeves, about Halle, about my mother's letter, about how every person I'd ever loved had taught me something about leaving, and how none of them had prepared me for staying gone. We stopped once, halfway to the airfield. The driver went inside for coffee, and I sat alone in the silence. A flock of geese flew overhead, perfect formation cutting through the gray. They didn't hesitate. They just knew where to go. I smiled faintly. "I envy you," I murmured. "You don't have to think about the past." My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number again. The same one as before. "North will be cold. Take the letter with you." No signature. No need for one. Holly. Even in death, he was still keeping promises. At the airfield, the wind was sharp enough to sting. Planes roared in the distance, their engines echoing across the hangars like thunder. An officer checked my papers, then nodded toward the transport waiting on the tarmac. As I climbed the ramp, I felt the weight of the flash drive still in my pocket. I hadn't destroyed it. I couldn't. Maybe one day I'd need it, not for revenge, but as proof that truth, once buried, could still survive. I found a seat by the window. The engines began to hum. The sky stretched open, vast and indifferent. When the wheels lifted off the ground, my chest tightened. Not with fear, but with something almost like hope. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from something. I was heading towards something. I looked down at the city one last time as it shrank into a patchwork of light and memory. And somewhere between the clouds and the quiet, I heard her voice again, steady, proud, unbroken. "That's my girl." I smiled, eyes burning, and whispered back to the sky, "I'll make it count, Mom." The clouds closed around me like a curtain. The next act had begun. The helicopter dipped low through the mountain fog, the blades slicing the morning mist into ribbons. Below us, the Alaskan wilderness stretched for miles. Jagged peaks, rivers frozen mid-flow, forests black and endless. It was the kind of place that could swallow you whole and never spit you back out. Asterisk, and maybe that was the point. I'd been reassigned as a civilian consultant, the kind of bureaucratic lie that meant I was being buried alive in plain sight. Reeves's last words echoed in my mind. "You're better off outside the blast radius." I didn't understand them until I saw the base carved into a glacier, silent and flagless. "Welcome to Outpost Meridian, ma'am," the young lieutenant shouted over the rotor wash. "Cold as hell on Earth." He grinned. The wind hit like knives. Colonel Dane Mercer met me at the pad, tall, broad, no insignia. His presence was rank enough. "Consultant Hart?"
He asked. "Consultant," I repeated. he smirked.
Sure, and I'm a yoga instructor. Inside, steel walls hummed under flickering lights. The air smelled of oil and nerves. Mercer briefed me fast. Every convoy we repositioned was being ambushed. The leaks were internal, and Reeves said you're good at finding rot, he added. That night, under an aura that looked like the sky confessing. I finally opened my mother's letter. If you're reading this, it means you left. That's good. Leaving is the only way you'll understand what staying cost me. Don't trust the ones who talk about honor the loudest, they sell it cheapest. And Claire, don't inherit my regrets. Her handwriting was clean, steady. The words left frost on my skin. Then came the alarms dot by the time I reached command. Red lights pulsed through the corridors. Perimeter sensors are blind. Mercer barked. Backup grid's dead. I scanned the feed sabotage. Not weather. Someone inside, show me your manifests, I demanded. Classified. Then this is officially a breach. As I scrolled, one name froze me, LT Gavin Rowe, the same lieutenant from the helicopter. The one who called this place hell before I'd even stepped out. We found him near the fuel depot. Standing still against the snow. You don't understand, he said softly. This base shouldn't exist. I'm just ending what should have ended long ago. His hand moved too fast. One shot cracked through the cold.
He hit the ground, eyes open to nothing. Mercer swore under his breath.
I stared at the drive clutched in Rowe's hand, another ghost in metal form. Hours later, I plugged it into a console. The data streamed in coordinates, encrypted orders, and a name I never expected. .col. Margaret Hart, Directive 47B. My mother. The ground seemed to tilt beneath me. The woman who called me a disgrace had left a trail straight back to herself. DC smelled like rain and politics. Reeves was waiting at the runway, eyes hollow. Why was her name on that file? I asked. Because she built what they're still using, he said quietly. Project Tether, an algorithm that predicts conflict before it happens. Your mother rode its conscience. When she tried to bury it, they buried her instead. So that's what the disgrace was about. He nodded. No, it was about power. At my apartment, I opened the files on Rose Drive. Her face filled the screen. My mother, younger, colder. If you're seeing this, Tether survived. We built it to prevent wars, but someone decided peace wasn't profitable. I hid the kill switch in my daughter's records. She's the only one I trust to end it. The video ended. My throat closed around a truth too heavy to swallow. She hadn't ruined me, she'd made me revolt. A knock at the door. Reeves. They traced the files, he said. They're coming. We ran. The safe house was dim and stinking of oil. Reeves poured coffee, his hands shaking slightly. She left a back door in every system, he said. If you can find it, you can end this. I looked at her letter again. Don't inherit my regrets. I don't plan to, I whispered. But I'll finish what she started. Headlights flared outside. Sirens followed. Reeves killed the lights. They're here, he said. The door exploded inward. We moved by instinct, Reeves covering, me diving through the back. Bullets punched through the walls. The air thick with smoke and noise. By the time the night swallowed me, I was bleeding and breathless, the drive clutched tight in my hand. This wasn't an escape anymore. It was a war of inheritance. 2 days later, the world was quieter. I stood in Arlington at dawn, rows of white marble glowing under the rising sun. I hadn't been here since the funeral they wouldn't let me attend in uniform. Now, I wore it anyway. Reeves limped beside me, his bandages showing beneath his coat. We didn't speak. Some truths don't need sound. I knelt and placed her insignia at the base of the stone. My reflection stared back, older but finally whole. You kept your promise, Reeves said. No, I said softly. I finally understood it. The wind carried a distant bugle. I raised my hand, not the stiff salute of duty, but a slow one of grace. This wasn't just her grave. It was where every secret we'd both carried was finally buried. Reeves broke the silence. What now? There's always another mission, I said. But this time I choose it. He smiled faintly. Then you'd better get moving before someone else writes your story. I looked across the field of stones and flags. Let them try. As the morning light spilled gold over the horizon, I turned away from the marble and walked forward, not as a disgrace, not as her shadow, but as her proof, a soldier who finally knew the weight of her own salute.